So yeah, just to introduce briefly the speakers today, we're delighted to welcome Alice Holden from Growing Communities Dagenham Farm in London, England. We've got Kate Norman and Ashley Wheeler from Trill Farm Garden in Devon in England, Polly Davies from Slade Farm Organics in South Wales, and Hannah Crabtree from Rough Draft Farmstead in Kentucky in the USA. I'm going to hand over to Alice now to kind of introduce the session a bit more and speak about your experience, Alice.
Thanks, Dee, and thanks everyone for joining us today in this session about farming or growing whilst parenting. I questioned whether to suggest this session as it's such a personal and contextually specific issue. I also wondered how specifically parenting affects this kind of work compared to others. However, it's the thing that's impacted my work more than anything else, physically, emotionally, and practically. And when I started asking others, I quickly found that I wasn't alone in this. So I concluded that just because it might affect most professions doesn't mean it shouldn't be discussed here, but rather it needs to be spoken of more widely in general. The farmers and growers here, Kate, Ash, Hannah, and Polly, have also kindly agreed to share their personal experience on parenting while farming. It should be noted that we are all only speaking for ourselves and that we do not necessarily have the answers to the things that come up. Being either from the UK or US, we're also missing a world of experience from elsewhere, and there may be more voices to be heard. This session is hopefully going to act as a portal into a much bigger discussion. We hope that sharing experience today might be helpful to others and enable this subject to be discussed more openly, as it's so important and can be undervalued and fall under the radar. So yeah, in terms of structure, as Dee said, we're each going to speak on our personal scenarios for about 10 minutes each, and then we'll have a more wide discussion between us and then open it up to everybody. It's a lot of me at the beginning, I'm afraid, but I'm going to go first, so hope you're not bored with the sound of my voice already. Okay, so I'll just start for 10 minutes talking about how I found the experience of running a farm and having young children. I'm Alice Holden, head grower at Growing Communities Dagenham Farm, a 1.7 acre market garden in London. I'm mother to Rose, who's 5, and Hyla, who's 3. I have a rather unusual situation for a farmer in that I'm employed by an organisation and don't live on or own the land I farm. This land is peri-urban on the fringe of the big city of London. Rose, my first child, was born in January, which I planned due to it being a quiet part of the season. This short-term plan sums up to some degree my limited idea of what it would be like going forward with a baby. I knew that my belly was growing bigger and I would have less to harvest as it grew bigger. But by November and December, the only way I could pick stuff was by shuffling along on my bum, as I was no longer able to bend over. And though I planned the birth to be at a quieter time of year, I hadn't really considered how the cycles of crop growing and baby growing would all be on an ongoing continuum. And at some point, these worlds would collide. I was very lucky with both conception and my pregnancy. It was grueling farming whilst carrying an ever-growing child, but I was pretty well throughout, apart from the tiredness. Some farming friends of mine have not been so fortunate due to adverse symptoms and the worry of repeated miscarriages. There was not pressure put on me, but I'm used to being responsible for the farm that I run, and I pushed myself to work as hard as I had before until the month before I gave birth. My midwife told me this is fine as long as my body was used to this kind of work, but to avoid heavy lifting. And I was lucky and pleased to be able to do this, but farming pregnant was really exhausting and did add another set of exhausting demands to an already exhausting, demanding job. As I'm employed, I didn't have to worry about financially covering the deficit for the farm left by me being unable to work. I had maternity cover organised by my organisation I work for, and I was very grateful for this. Having maternity cover meant that before I went off, as well as the day-to-day job whilst being heavily pregnant, I needed to do a handover. I tried to lay down the blueprints of how I farm to help guide someone else in my absence. And in trying to do this, I realized that so much of the way I farm is intuitive response based on my experience of the day-to-day observation. I found it really hard to try and put everything down in guides and spreadsheets. I tried to do it, but I felt I'd failed, and I felt guilty about this failure. This made me feel that I should be on call during my maternity leave, which was probably not the best thing for either me or my maternity cover. This wasn't asked of me, but I did feel responsible. Though I don't live on or own the land that I farm, I do love it. It's so all-consuming and demanding, a type of work that's connected to a place. It's strange to walk out and lock the gate for the last time for 8 months or a year. I literally felt like the soily carpet was swept from under my feet, and it made me realize, whether healthy or not, how bound up my identity is with what I do. I also came to realize how fundamental being outside and working in nature is to my mental health. I felt completely ungrounded. The second time I left, I was more able to let go, and even felt some relief, as I'd learned from my first maternity leave that things can carry on without me. While I was away, the people who covered me gave it their all and became entwined in the place. It was hard for them to let go too when I came back. Working a piece of land is different from some jobs. It's not just a job, it's also an intimate relationship with a place. When I returned to work, I felt an acute sense of what I term as spring disbelief. It's a feeling I get every year when I sow the first seeds and feel I'm a phony and I don't know if it will work. Though I knew it wasn't logical, as I've been growing for over a decade, I've never felt so unconfident as post-maternity leave. And in talking to others, I found that I'm not alone in feeling this. Having thought about this, maybe it's partly to do with things having carried on without you, that you question if you're really needed. To me, parenting seemed to be disconnected from my prior world. I'm not really sure why it seems so, but I felt like I'd been separated from the rest of my life, which is strange, as I was so key to life in general. In retrospect, it's not surprising that feelings of isolation affected my confidence. On the positive side of this, before going off, it's easy for growers to feel immense pressure that they're the key thing that holds everything else together. It's humbling and perhaps healthy to realize that things can carry on without you. And though hard on the ego, this was ultimately freeing and something positive I learned through the experience. It was also beneficial to the farm to be enriched by other people when I was away. On returning to work, I felt both relief and guilt, and a visceral wrench at suddenly being detached from leaving my children in childcare. I wanted to return to work, and though having been full-time before having children, 3 days a week felt the absolute maximum possible for me to return. I was used to breastfeeding on demand. I didn't see how either of us would manage full days without one another. Emotionally, it was really hard, but I was amazed how my body adjusted. Though for a long period, I had to avoid the tunnel that was near a playground on our farm, as the noise would trigger my body to lactate. I dropped off my child, had a cry, and went to the farm. It was wonderful to have the freedom of uninterrupted work. The nurture requirements of the crops felt small compared to my children, but everything felt now like it was on an unflexible timer, and no matter how much I gave, it could never be enough. I always have felt like I should be nurturing something somewhere else. It's the nature of both farming and child rearing that you are responsible for keeping things alive, and that's part of what makes both so demanding and fulfilling. Having young children and running a farm, I've never given so much, yet constantly felt like I was failing all. It's taught me to value and use the time I have really well, and it was a boot camp in being efficient. I've never seen anyone lay a tunnel more efficiently with drip lines than 3 single parents. They did it as if there was no time to be spared, and I guess there wasn't. The crops have to meet the orders and the children have to be picked up, and there's no longer flexibility. If you're employed, most jobs have 4 weeks of paid holiday a year. UK school holidays generally amount to about 12. Navigating work and children is something I had not given much thought prior to the time. It's only now, nearly 6 years after having my first child, I am returning to full-time work, and I'm not sure if I'm able to sustain this, as I don't spend enough time with my children. Work-wise, I'd like to be full-time, but would rather spend the time with them. If you're a farmer, the summer holidays begin as the biggest harvest period of the year starts. I recently heard summer holidays are when they are for as long as they are, so that all the family can be home to help with extra workload of harvest. If so, for me, this holiday design over the last 2 summers has felt like a bad joke. What if a traditional child carer is also the farmer, the main farmer? The only way I could do this was to base my children 100 miles away with their dad who could work remotely and grandparents. Working over being with them is, at the end of the day, is a choice, but it's not an easy one between a career I love and the children I love and the financial necessity to have a job. Work on the farm is dependent on the assumption someone is there to look after young ones. A generation ago, this was my mum. I grew up on a farm where my mum raised children, cooked for the workers, kept the house functioning, and fitted in farm work when it was possible. She recently gave me her diaries from some of this period between 1973 and 77, and they tell how she liked to help out on the farm when possible, and she generally enjoyed this, but most of her time was demanded by the children, and this she also enjoyed and wanted to do. However, she found it very hard and lonely, largely because what she did was mostly unacknowledged as work. It was often unseen and generally taken for granted. It wasn't recognised as being joined up with everything else that was important on the farm. The valued work was all about the rest of the farm, the organic movement and the so-called bigger causes. It struck me while reading this that she was really the fundamental thing everything else relied upon. In growers' terms, she was like the soil, the base for all other activities, the foundation of life, yet it wasn't joined up in terms of value in her mind or anyone else's. Here's a short extract, and then I'll let someone else have a speak. The others go out and work on big projects with definite limits, and I go on in my limitless routines by myself. I don't want company in many ways, but somehow I feel lonely. More that I feel that somehow I'm missing expressing myself. Societally, I feel totally valued as a grower. As a mother, I felt generally perceived as lesser. I think a large part of this comes from my own cultural conditioning, and yet this is the most difficult and wonderful thing I've ever done. Having had separate periods committed to each, both are immensely challenging and fulfilling. Finally, now my eldest is 5, I'm beginning to find a way to navigate the two together so they don't push me beyond my resources. I love both immensely. I wish I could have split the time between each more consistently the whole way through and joined up the value of both sooner. Thanks.
Oh, I think we're next, aren't we? I feel a little bit choked up after that, to be honest. That was amazing. And yeah, like big thanks to Alice for sort of suggesting this idea, this whole thing. I think it would have been, I think we feel that it would have been really useful for us when we started out or when we were about to have kids to listen to this. And just want to say, kind of reiterate what Alice was saying about this is kind of about sharing our experiences of running a market garden and bringing up kids. But it's not like, we're not saying this is the way to do it. This is just kind of how we did it. So we'll talk a bit about the way that we've done it up to now. And it's important to say that like the decisions that we've made have kind of been largely influenced by the specifics of our situation. So yeah, it might not work for everyone at all. One of the themes of this talk and parenting in general is that people often have an opinion on how you're raising your kids, and there's so much baggage and feelings of guilt and all those other emotions that come up with balancing childcare and work. And also like what Alice was saying about the culturally, we don't value raising kids or domestic work at all. Bringing up kids can have a really negative impact on confidence as well, often more so for the primary carer. And getting back to farming or growing after being off caring for babies can be really challenging. So yeah, we're massively grateful to have this session. and hopefully it will be like the start of giving a bit more space for people to feel comfortable about sharing their experiences without being judged.
I think doing what works for you is the most important thing you can do without getting too influenced by others or feeling too guilty about it. Giving yourself permission to do what feels right, but not getting too bogged down about what works and what doesn't. We were always very mindful of the fact that just because one day the kids hated the garden wouldn't mean that they would the next. Things change so much. Just because one summer holiday, you feel guilty about putting the kids into holiday clubs, the next year they might love it, find that they're desperate to go.
I was brought up on an organic market garden, which was obviously a big influence on why I wanted to do what we're doing now, and also doing it with Kate and bringing up kids in a similar sort of environment to how I was brought up. Obviously, like in the height of summer when it's all a bit crazy, it can be really difficult to remember this. And when you're trying to balance everything, it can be quite a struggle. But having said that, I'm reminded almost daily of why we're doing it and the benefits of it. Seeing how much freedom the kids have, and also the skills that they're picking up being on a farm as well.
So just to give you a bit of background onto how we became market gardeners, Ash's parents, as he said, were running an organic box scheme. So he was brought up in a similar situation to the one that our kids are now. He went on to study horticulture, went into ornamental gardening. I spent my holidays working on his parents' farm, and together we went woofing France. My parents were self-employed, so they both worked together 24/7 as we do now. So for us, that experience was really normal. They were market traders, so also a very intense summer seasonal work that was spent a lot of it working outside. So we went into work after uni, and then within 2 years we were ready for a change, and the opportunity of Trill came up and we jumped at it, ready to move to the southwest.
So just to give you a bit of kind of context of where we are, and the market garden and stuff. It's called Trill Farm Garden. We're in East Devon near Axminster, and we rent just 2.5 acres on a larger 250-acre organic farm, and there's lots of other businesses here and other people living here and stuff. And we live on the farm, and we're about 50 meters away from the market garden. We sell produce to local cafes, restaurants and shops, and then in 2020 we started a box scheme as well. And then we have 2 kids, Digby, who's 11, and Stan, who is nearly 8. We started the market garden in 2010, and that was in February 2010, and we found out that we were going to have Digby just before that, basically when our house where we were living before was all packed up and ready to go to Trill. So it all happened at once, which was it was kind of challenging, but also we were quite young as well. It was all just a bit crazy at the beginning. And the market garden, it was just started out as just us 2 for the first year, and then we had woofers that helped us a couple of days a week as well. And it was full on, especially the first year or 2, obviously starting a business and putting in lots of hours. We did always keep 1 day off a week though, and really pleased that we kind of started doing that from the beginning. We were 25 when Digby was born in September 2010, so we'd been at Trill for 6 months or something, 7 months, and we didn't really have any friends at that point with kids, or family who lived close by either, so we were pretty naive about it all, and it meant that our kind of the way we raised the kids was fairly instinctive, it felt like, because we weren't surrounded by others bringing up kids. and we also didn't really read much about it. Not like intentionally, it was just, I guess we were starting the business as well, and we were just young and naive, and I don't know, thought it was all going to be just going to kind of happen.
So Digby's pregnant with Digby was pretty easy. I kind of carried on as usual. As Ash said, we just started the business, so long hours. We had Sundays off, but we worked Saturdays, and yeah, not a lot of time for rest. I wasn't particularly clued up about taking care of myself. I think I'd take naps next to the veg beds and then carry on. Morning sickness, I'd sort of do harvest, go outside the tunnel, throw up, come back in. But the good thing about that is that I stayed pretty active throughout the pregnancy and harvesting carrots even the night before that Digby was born. Being pregnant with Stan was very different, and running around after a toddler, and the work just became much more physically demanding. I wasn't able to stand up for long periods, and so I did a lot less physical work, and then took the afternoons off and did a lot of the work, that office-based work. So Digby was born in the September, which was a great time in terms of business, because we cater a lot for the tourist industry. Our work is and the growing, we work a lot in spring, summer and autumn, so it meant that we didn't have the stress of spring at the same time as working out what it was supposed to do with the baby. It gave us a few months to work out what we were doing while the garden was quite quiet. Stan was born in April, so it was a much busier time of year, but also he was our second, so many of the anxieties of child rearing were eased, and by that point the business had grown, so we were able to take on more help. So that was a very different experience we had. And as Ash was saying earlier, we were lucky to live on site, which meant that I could work, come in, feed, sort the babies out, and then if it got to the point where I couldn't cope with child care anymore, we'd swap. And if Ash needed a break from the garden, then we swapped. We always put our kids to sleep in pushchairs or in the car, so we could take them into the garden or on deliveries. The way we worked is that when they slept, we worked, and when they were a little bit older, we would start the harvest early on, and they would sleep in the house, and we managed to get a baby monitor that would stretch all the way, and then as soon as you hear them start breathing heavily, we'd run back to the house. We decided pretty early on that actually any time that we worked together in the garden was going to be a bit of a bonus. It was hard with Digby as we didn't have much help, but with Stan I was never relied on, and that took the pressure off. We never did that thing, people sort of say, oh well, that's fine, you just sort of stick him in a sling and you can just carry on. That absolutely never worked for us, and and it's amazing how many people said that to us. But one thing I was able to do with the kids was take them to market, and that was something I really enjoyed. We'd go there, Ash would help set up, and then he'd go back to the garden to do some work back here, taking one of the kids with him. I always felt a huge sense of achievement in being able to work and juggle the kids at the same time. Obviously it didn't always work, but people always wanted to help out, and Digby spent his early years in the hairdressers next to the stall when I was busy. They'd just take him in, and his formative years were definitely spent in there. And market was great because we managed to make it work, whereas for us trying to work in the garden was quite frustrating with the kids. They seemed to sense that we were stressed and had lots on, and it never really worked. We tried to do some work with them, but often it wouldn't be for very long, and they get hungry and tired, bored very quickly. We did have a few successes putting up a polytunnel with Digby in a playpen, but I think that was isolated.
Yeah. Generally we took on pretty sort of stereotyped gender roles, which feels kind of slightly strange and uncomfortable saying that, but that is the truth of it. And it was also something that we talked about, and so my main focus was the market garden, whilst Kate's was more the childcare, and it was definitely obviously influenced by my experience being brought up on a market garden, and then studying horticulture. And then obviously early on, when Kate was breastfeeding, that kind of is practically more useful for her to do that than me. But I think also, you know, definitely there were the sort of, there's those cultural influences that maybe kind of seep in. You know, when we started writing this stuff down, you kind of like, you don't think about it at the time, but that stuff is definitely, it's definitely there somewhere. But we always had like an understanding and like a real clear, open communication with each other, which meant that if either of us had too much time with the kids or too much time in the garden, then we said so and we swapped. And then as time went on, and the kids' basic needs were less demanding, Kate became much more involved in the garden again. And I suppose I became sort of more involved with the kids a bit. Maybe your involvement in the garden was sort of stronger, I'd say, at that point. And then this especially changed a lot over the last couple of years. And that's, I think, partly due to the kids, their age. So yeah, Digby's 11 and Stan is nearly 8. So this is when Digby was kind of 9. It changed quite a lot, and then it's also because of we started the box scheme as well. So starting the box scheme, there were kind of new roles again in the business that emerged, which Kate took on. Yeah, and the fact that the kids were just old enough to be left to sort themselves out, especially during the holidays. So in the holidays, we'll kind of get up and go out to work whilst they're asleep. They've like, really luckily, I guess, for us, they've been quite good at sleeping quite late. So often we'll go and start work and they'll be asleep still. And we don't start like really early. This is kind of like 7:30 or something. And yeah, then they'll get up and sort themselves out with breakfast and stuff, and then kind of come and find us a bit later. It's also worth saying that Digby's a really sort of responsible and conscientious child, so that obviously helped with this. He's the oldest one. Yeah, so that kind of started happening when Digby was probably about 7 or 8, and Stan was maybe 4 or 5. We also taught them to use the phone at that point, so that they could phone us if they needed anything. This is obviously something that's totally different, like with our situation compared to you, Alice, in that we live here, and is a massive bonus for us, like living here on site, and definitely recognise how lucky we've been to have that. Lockdown for us was massively life-changing as well, and especially for Stan, our youngest, who became really obsessed with farming when he wasn't going into school, and he'd often go off like for up to sort of, well, I think one day he was off on the farm for 8 hours. We like packed his lunch and he went off for 8 hours with the farmer here, helping feed the animals, and he was fencing and rounding up sheep and all that sort of stuff. And he learned a huge amount and gained loads of confidence doing that as well. But it did mean that going back to school when it started again was quite tricky.
So when the kids were little, we put them into nursery for 2.5 days from the age of 2.5. And that was based around the busy harvest, packing and delivery days. These are the days that were higher pressure and both of us needed to be relied upon. Summers in the beginning were pretty tricky to navigate, but we did a combination of relying on friends or swapping childcare with other families. My parents, who lived 2.5 hours away, were really helpful, and they'd come up and stay locally and then take the kids overnight for things like, you know, bank holidays. And then there was a fair amount of ignoring the kids as well, just so they kind of amuse themselves. I really enjoyed the experience of having a second child, as all the anxieties and frustrations of juggling the work and the work and a baby, and I was more limited on what I could do. So naturally I did just take a step back and focused on childcare. I'm aware that, you know, this time does go very quickly, and you know, when the kids are little, people tell you that all the time, and you think, yeah, stop saying it to me, because you just don't believe it. But actually, you know, the days drag, but the years really, they do whiz by. Just another thing I wanted to say was, you know, we're saying how lucky we are with the way that childcare works here, and you know, being on the farm and being able to work and juggle both of those things. We're really mindful that we want to be able to offer that to people that work for us. So we've Zoe, who does our deliveries, when her little boy was really little, she would come in and take him on deliveries, and I want to be able to offer that, and we don't offer it a lot, but something moving forward, being able to offer that to people that come and work, so that, you know, they can drop their kids off to school, and they can pick them up from school, and they can, you know, miss the middle of the day because they need to run out and, I don't know, see some play in the church or something. So yeah, and I think it's a one to be mindful of moving into the future.
Yeah, yeah, I said it before, but we're really aware of how privileged we are to be living here on a beautiful farm, as well as having the work here. And that obviously gives the kids all this freedom, and has given us more flexibility as well to both work in the garden whilst they amuse themselves, especially as they've got older and during the holidays. So yeah, we'll on the kind of busy work days, sort of 4 days a week, we'll get up and go to work. The kids will wake up a bit later, sort themselves out, and then they'll kind of join us for tea break and lunch break. But other than that, we are working, but we're also here. You know, it's like, it's a weird situation. I was talking to my mum about it the other day when I was talking to her about this session, and I sort of really remember that feeling. I don't remember it being like that they were just working all the time and they had no time for us. They were like definitely always there, but they also were always working, but they were there as well. So that kind of happens until about like 2 or 3ish, 4 days a week, and then one of us will usually sort of be more there and more present with them, maybe, or even just like doing office work in the house, being around a bit more. And then Kate's, since sort of coming back after the kids to do more garden work, has always taken a day during the week throughout the year away from the market garden. This is obviously like a useful day in the summer holidays, so the kids are only really amusing themselves for 4 days a week as well. Also, Digby's really into sport, and so he often ends up going to holiday clubs, and then Stan's mega into farming, so he's just happy to be here a lot of the time. So summer holidays have gone from being a really stressful time of year trying to juggle the childcare and market gardening to actually a nice time. And we often both feel quite sad when the kids have to go back after summer holidays, and this is something that my mum also said she felt exactly the same when we went back to school after summer holidays, which is really often we hear like the opposite from parents, and it's definitely a unique situation, and we realize how privileged we are with that sort of living here and having the work here as well. Being self-employed, we don't get any holiday pay, so during the summer holidays the kids have to just fit in around what we do. But yeah, one of us is usually around some point after like mid-afternoon onwards, and as they've got older, they've just got we've got better, actually, I guess, as the business has developed. We've got better at not working crazy hours in the garden and fitting in some of the office work at times when the kids are in bed or doing other things. We also have sort of built up to taking off usually a couple of long weekends off in the summer holidays, and then got into the habit of taking October half term off, all of the Christmas holidays, and often February half term too. It's definitely not something we started off doing, and it took us a few years to get to that point, but it is something that we are able to do now, kind of logistically, with more people, more help in the garden, but also mentally allowing ourselves to do it, and trying to break through this kind of cultural barrier that the feeling that we've got to work all the time, and this kind of culture amongst a lot of farmers and growers that sort of suggests that you're not really a true farmer or grower unless you're working all the time, which is obviously, it's really unhelpful, especially if you've got kids, and it's something that I think everyone needs to try and work through and sort of break through that. It's really easy to be influenced by these kind of attitudes, and to neglect home and family life, for those kind of attitudes to seep in. And obviously, like, raising crops and animals is really demanding, especially if you're not hugely experienced. But the list of things will always be too long to achieve. And there kind of came a time for us, I think me especially, Kate had already sort of got to this point before me, but when we recognised that we couldn't get everything done in the garden, and that sort of, we stopped doing Saturday markets, so we had full weekend, like the weekend off, and we had a bit more time away from the business, and that is something that I sort of regret a bit about not getting to that point sooner. That, from your mum's quote, Alice, there was something in there that really sort of resonated with me, that sort of feeling of not getting to that balance sooner, I suppose, of the work and childcare stuff. And I think, I feel that, but I also, I guess, starting the business off at the same time as having kids, the pressure of that, and also some of those like cultural and external pressures have meant that I felt that I needed to be working really long hours all the time. But over the years we've got more help in the garden and more help with sort of the admin side of business as well, which has taken some of the pressure off. One thing I kind of, when we were writing this, that I thought was really worth mentioning was about the importance of not thinking either childcare or market garden work is more important than the other. Is that thing of like it sort of crosses over with that, the fact that it's not valued, childcare, at all. But it's quite easy to get in these, when it's not very balanced. We felt it was quite easy to get into the mindset of like either one being more tiring or more hard work, and it's easy to get in that mindset when you're really knackered and everything feels like too much, and you sort of start comparing what each other are doing and resenting it a little bit. And that's where it's like so important to have that open communication all the time. That's what helped with us anyway. So in hindsight, I think we've managed pretty well, and definitely always having at least one day off a week had sort of from the beginning has helped, and living where we work is a massive privilege that we've, the kids are around all the time. I'm sure we'd do things differently if we had another child now, and probably the most obvious one would be splitting the duties more. So
to conclude, when we started writing this presentation, we were very practical with our solutions, as you've heard, and explaining the way we navigated a very challenging time. But once we started reading the experiences of others and really engaging in the topic, it allowed us to become really reflective on the times when the kids were really small. There are so many things tied up with having kids: themes of guilt, isolation, loss of identity, loss of confidence, and feeling that you're failing at everything. but our experience of bringing the kids up in a market garden setting is overwhelmingly positive. And it's worth noting the fact that starting out business and child rearing are both incredibly stressful. But as we built confidence in both of these, many of the struggles and negative emotions start to drift away. It has definitely been essential to have a really open communication, and we tried not to get into the habit of comparing each other's main roles. Farming and childcare are both really stressful and difficult. And if the balance of roles is not shared evenly, it's easy to think your own role is the hardest. We tried not to get into a competition about whose was harder or more tiring. The important thing for us is to always look back on why we chose to be market gardeners and have children, and to push ourselves to move outside of our comfort zone, but also to share experiences and keep communication open, as both farming and childcare could be really isolating. But when you come together and share, you soon realise that loads of people are having really similar experiences, and you can hopefully find a way to navigate farming and childcare in a less isolating way. Thanks.
Sorry for going over the time limit.
That was a really lovely, guys. I think I'm on next. I just to start with, I definitely have massive Barneys for my husband. I think your communication sounds amazing. So my name is Polly. I am a farmer in South Wales. I am probably more of a sort of typical farmer. I'm organic and mixed, and I farm about 300 hectares, which is on a tenancy. I farm with my husband Graham, and in terms of the farm, we have split the enterprises. So I manage the arable, beef, sheep and the pigs, and my husband manages the on-farm butchery, the direct sales, the meat box deliveries and the seasonal veg box. So we're quite busy. And we've got 2 kids. They are called James, who is 8, and Daniel, who's 6. We came back to the farm when I was 8 months pregnant, about 10 years ago or 9 years ago. It's when I was talking it through with Graham, what I tried to do is we try and have a conversations with ourselves 10 years ago and see what advice we'd give ourselves. So Graham said, it's not very positive, I'm really sorry about this, but what Graham said was, prepare yourself to compromise on what you want on life. You cannot have it all. There is never a break on the farm as well as at home. So that sounds like we probably should have more holidays, but that's what he said. And my advice is get as much childcare as you can afford, because I really love childcare. It's amazing. I thought I'd ask the kids as well what they thought about us farming. And James, who's my 8-year-old, said, I would not say I really like it, but I can't think of anything else. My son Daniel, who's 5, said, I really love tractors. So I feel I should have briefed them better to give a more positive response on this, but that's the truth. That's what they said. So from my perspective, what the kids get out of it is they have got an amazing work ethic. They have to work really hard, and they have a really wonderful understanding of death and life, because we're a livestock farm. It happens. They also know where food comes from, and they have an amazing understanding of primary production. And Graham put it really well, that they've got like a worldly education. The boys aren't brilliant. They're not too hot on maths and spelling, but Daniel, who's my 5-year-old, can tell you how a plough works. So I feel that's really positive. So that's my sort of my introduction. But I personally find it absolutely impossible to do paperwork with the kids around. My kids have never slept late. My 8-year-old has been up at 5 o'clock every morning since age 0. So I'm amazed. I don't know what you did. Did you drug them? That'd be amazing. So I can't have them doing when I'm doing paperwork, and Graham can't obviously have them when he's butchering. That's completely impractical. So the kids don't really see all aspects of the farming. They do see a lot of shepherding. They also understand how to feed a pig. James is now that much older, so we have sort of Harry Potter blaring on audiobooks on the sort of 2-hour trip shepherding. it's a kind of a good compromise, because otherwise I say, do you want to go shepherding? And the answer is normally typically no, I want to build Lego. I always have to get him to turn off Harry Potter on audiobooks when I'm trying to concentrate and look at the stock, because I quite like Harry Potter too. But if I'm trying to concentrate on grass length or sheep or cow conditions, it has to go off, but at least it makes it not a massively negative thing of going shepherding. Yeah, obviously, so it takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours a day doing shepherding every day. And obviously on weekends and holidays, the kids have to come. They are actually not that bad at spotting issues and sort of ill animals and sheep on their backs and that sort of thing, but I definitely couldn't send them to do it on their own yet, so that's not going to happen. But they do seem to have a sort of good surrounded experience of what's going on. Like this morning, we had a cow calve twins, and the cow rejected one of the calves, because that tends to happen if they wander off and they forget that they've given birth. I wish I could do that, but cows do that all the time. And what you have to do is you sort of put a muzzle over the cow and sort of tie, and so they can't move, they can't kick their calf away, to ensure that the calf gets the colostrum. And you do the same thing with the sheep. So when I was I said to James, this has happened, and he said, oh, have you tied the cow up? I was like, yes, I can't believe you even know that that's what we do. So amazingly, they must know more than I give them credit for, because we do the same thing in lambing when a mum rejects one of their lambs in lambing. From a personal perspective, I do love my kids, but I really don't love looking after them all the time. I do find, but from a farming perspective, I really love farming, and I find it really interesting and challenging. And looking after kids, I genuinely do find it quite tiring and a bit boring. And I don't think that's said enough. And if people don't, that's bloody brilliant. You're a star. You deserve a medal. But it's just, unfortunately, it's what I find is the truth for me. And I just thought I'd just finish on saying what I think raising kids and farming or doing a carbon audit, and how there's quite a lot of similarities. So my first point is with both farming and raising kids, sleep really helps. So doing either farming or raising kids when you're tired is really hard. So try to sleep. My second point is there's like a million advisors telling you how to do it. And normally the best solution is to go with your gut, because you know your family and your farm best. And sometimes too much advice is not very helpful. And my third bit of advice is, when you think you've mastered something, so you think something's going really well, whether that be in the family or farming, unfortunately, normally the goalposts move, and you have to start all over again. But from a positive perspective, you are always learning, so the experience is always growing in yourself. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope it wasn't too negative, but and I hope it's helpful for everyone. So I think over to Hannah now.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to try to go fast so we have time for a discussion, but I'm Hannah. I live in the States in Kentucky. I farm with my partner, Jesse. There we've been farming about 10 years doing mixed vegetables. And then I have two kids further, who's 7, and Ellis, who is 3. So a lot of things have already been touched on, but sort of I wanted to talk about this past summer, I went to a conference on food, health, and equity, and it was specifically for women. And at the beginning of the conference, on the first night there, we were all asked to stand up and in front of the group and say something that made us feel angry. And I thought that was sort of a strange way to begin the week, but yeah, it seemed negative, right? It seemed like a negative way to start things off, but I think it was actually really empowering and beautiful to be in a large space and see woman after woman stand up and say what made them angry. I think when we articulate what makes us angry, it tells us also about what we love and what we want to fight for and what we want to make better. So I think a little bit like a lot of what we're saying today in this talk feels a little bit negative, and thinking about maybe anyone who's listening who doesn't have kids yet. I think this isn't something that gets talked about a lot. So a lot of us have a lot of things building up that make us feel sad or angry, but I think that just tells us what we're passionate about and what we want to change. And the first step in doing that, I think, is just getting together and connecting with people and talking about them. So that was something that came up as I was starting to make a list of is just the negativity, but I think there's hope in anger and things like that. Yeah, it's how we get to solutions and making things better. So the thing that I talked about in that conference, the thing I stood up and said that made me feel angry was loneliness and isolation. I think that farming specifically can be very isolating. It's an isolating lifestyle or an isolating career choice, or it can be. But so that coupled with motherhood, and then coupled with, the ongoing realities of COVID had left me sort of feeling really alone, coming out of the fog of postpartum and then looking around and feeling like, where is everybody? Where are my friends and where's my partner? And that made me feel angry and seemed kind of unfair. And yeah, I think just thinking about farming specifically, even if you're living in an urban area, farming is just like a really all-consuming job. It's a lifestyle. You're working extreme hours, you aren't taking weekends off, you can't really go on vacations or see your friends, and it's physically demanding. It's relentless. And I think parenting, specifically for me, motherhood, is a very similar thing, the all-consuming, the physicality, the emotional and mental drain. It's a lot. And it's all happening at a time when you actually need the most connection. And so what happened for me specifically in motherhood, and I probably would think I'm not alone in that, is that the one person, in this case, my husband, the non-birthing person ends up taking on a lot of those outside roles, the physicality of farming, and the birthing person takes on a lot of the inner work, the inside work, and the domestic work. And that work is so important, but like some other people have talked about, it's very unseen, it's very invisible. And what we sort of define as the definition of farming is the physical work, the work that you can see. So yeah, it just becomes very difficult carrying that mental and emotional load and having it not be seen when you're used to working a job of physicality and of going outside and doing all of this constructive work is a very hard shift. Yeah, I feel like I'm going to skip a lot of this negative stuff so we can talk more, but I just to talk more in a hopeful or solution-oriented direction to end with, some of the sort of like broader things I've been thinking about a lot are just reimagining the way we think about farms in general. Like I think for my husband and I, we started off very hopeful of like getting our own little piece of land and being super self-sufficient and doing everything ourselves, which is really beautiful. But it sort of by definition leads you to that isolation that I was talking about, where you look around and you're very much on your own and wishing you had a lot of help. So we talk a lot about collaborative farms and cooperative farms and just even communal life in general. It feels like something we have a lot of conversations about lately. I think that makes sense in farming. It also makes sense in life, right? Like we biologically and like we would have been raising families in this sort of like generational community with lots of help around us, people to take on that burden, whether it's the work, the farming work, or just the parenting work. That's something I've been thinking a lot about. Like we could be building these sort of solutions into the systems that we live in instead of working really hard to get to a goal in our career or our farm and then trying to find ways to find childcare or find help. We could build those into the systems from the beginning. That's something I'm thinking a lot about. And then, yeah, thinking about, this has been touched on a little bit too, but just it helps me a lot to change my perspective. Like on days where I feel like I've really just dropped the ball on a lot of things, whether I dropped the ball in the farm work or I've dropped the ball with my kids. At the end of the day, like my kids have spent the entire day like playing in mud puddles and like picking up bugs and living outside. And it's a childhood that I think a lot of people would define as being like ideal. So even when I think I've been a bad mom or ignored them, they actually are doing what we set out to do when we imagined having a farm with kids. It's the life that like we wanted. And so getting outside of our heads a little bit, not comparing ourselves to other people or what seems to be going great for other people, especially with social media. I think we're often comparing the like worst realities of our life to people's, their highlight reels that they're curating. And that's just like a recipe for, disaster. So that kind of getting outside of my head, getting outside, literally, remembering why we want to have kids and a farm at the same time is super helpful for me. But I feel like I don't want to talk too much. I feel like our time, it would be great to be spent talking to each other more or discussing things.
Thanks so much to all of our speakers for sharing your personal accounts and really honest reflections about your experiences of farming with children. We had planned to kind of go deeper into some of the themes that kind of came up, and there's a lot there's a lot that's come up, and it's kind of like which direction to go in or how to take it. There was so much about navigating isolation and loneliness, around how you value your work and your capacity in your work when you come back from leave. There was stuff about farming while pregnant, childcare. It's all kind of like coming up, and I guess it'd be interesting maybe to hear, and it's come up as a question around basically how to kind of find, be it, I guess we'll speak, everyone's got very different experiences. Some people have family close by to support, some are urban growing, some like rural growing growing farming in a more kind of traditional nuclear family structure. But I guess I certainly hear it a lot as well with a lot of people I know, these kind of questions around how to farm and build a more kind of available community around you, especially if you have kids in the mix. And I guess, Hannah, you were kind of saying that that's something that you and your partner are kind of exploring more, and I know everyone kind of touched upon it in different ways, and it's a question now as well from a participant, from Sarah. And I was wondering, do you want to kind of say a bit more about that, Hannah, or and the other panelists?
Sure. I mean, we like to talk about forming a community farm. We are not there yet, but a solution that's been working for us in the meantime is that we're a pretty small farm, so we have just one full-time employee, but we've also been hiring part-time childcare on the farm. So having somebody come like just 2 days a week to watch the kids there at the farm, so that I can be fully outside. Like, my kids are old enough that I can go outside even when they're home, but I have to like be mindful of where they are and what's going on. So to be able to have somebody come and be with the kids, and I can really like check out and work really hard, but they're there if I need to run inside. Or we had somebody even when my youngest was still nursing, so I could go in and breastfeed but run back out and be able to like put in headphones and tune out. That's been really helpful for me, and mental health wise, to have even just 2 part-time days where I can 100% full-time be on the farm, but not sending the kids away. That's worked for us. They're still there at the farm. They can still be outside and playing and see us working, but that's been a good balance childcare wise for us, because I'm also homeschooling my oldest, so they don't go to school. So that sort of like part-time childcare on farm thing has been helpful. But But yeah, in terms of building that community or like physically like starting a farm with another family, I think is really interesting. I wish we had thought more about that before we started. So I don't have like practical solutions for that. Maybe somebody else does, but I think it's good things to think about. Either doing that, literally doing that, farming with other people, or just bringing other people in more creative ways than just like hiring a worker on your farm.
It's interesting because the diary extract I was reading from was from my mum, and they were actually on a commune that they'd set up in the 70s. So I think, you know, even within that community, the whole idea was to have a sense of community. The value given to her role wasn't given its due. So I think that's just something more widely, societally, we should be thinking about. Yeah, that's just what I wanted to add. But yeah, that should be in all areas. And maybe one way of doing that is just to try and make sure more people experience the different roles, and you know, you get so much empathy from doing each thing.
I can add on to that. Like, I think you're doing amazingly having the kids on the farm, but I think it's if you can shift them off, it's quite good for your sanity sometimes. So I do put mine in every single holiday club I can find. So even if they have no interest in tennis, it's really cheap, so they can go and do tennis for a couple of days. So I think when you have kids on the farm, like by default, they literally experience everything. So just to shift them to someone else, like does help you to be more present and less stressed sometimes. Like my husband and I have 50% each on terms of looking after the kids. So when that works in school days is I have the kids 2 days, he has them 2 days, and we really argue over the fifth day, and then on Saturday and Sunday we argue. So I mean, it's quite a lot of arguing. It's, in terms of what that means is you have to pick them up and you drop them off from school, and that means you just got pretty much a half day. And I think and that works the same with clubs, because obviously you can't have them there all the time. I'm also really lucky, like we don't do any community type stuff, but my parents are really local, and I feel like I feel like I'm incredibly lucky having my mum, and now actually amazingly my dad. My dad was less good when the kids were tiny, but now they're a bit bigger. Actually, he's doing a lot, and my mum has always done a lot. So you don't appreciate how useful family is until you get to sort of situations where you can go, oh, something's not very well, like this cow is calving and I need you to have the child now. So there's very few people you can sort of do that to. So I found I really appreciate them being there. And my sister, who's in a completely different situation to me, she regularly points out that I probably don't appreciate it enough. So maybe mums and dads, older generations, I think that's probably what happened historically, is more older generations did quite a lot of the childcare, but I don't know.
Just to jump in quickly on some of that, I feel a lot of sadness that my children aren't on the farm more, but I grew up on a farm and it was wonderful, and there are so many benefits to that. However, I think the most fundamental thing is, is how you're doing, how your parents are feeling, and so to sustain yourself, number one, is probably the biggest impact you can have on your kids, no matter where you are.
And I get actually just building on that kind of sustaining yourself and, making sure you as the parents are feeling happy and resourced is a really important thing when minding kids. I guess one reflection I have that I was wondering if, you could speak more to is, I think it was brought up by everyone who shared around when going back to work, that kind of that need to rebuild confidence, and that, yeah, I've also, yeah, can relate to that, and I've heard a lot of people kind of share that that kind of unexpected struggle of needing to kind of yeah, feel like you know what you're doing again, and like get back into it and kind of really trust yourself. And I guess it'd be interesting to hear, because I think everyone, speaking of actually kids relatively similar ages, but yeah, I think Kate, you were saying the days are long but the years are quick, and that when kind of talking, I guess, about like isolation and needing to rebuild confidence, I guess there's the different phases of the kid's life. And you know, so when a kid is like, you know, I have a kid who's not even 2 yet, and definitely as she gets a bit older and starts going to childcare, I can see my capacity to engage in all the work I do will be a lot more free than it has been. But I guess it'd be yeah, just interesting, like in your experiences, what did you feel as your kids got older you did have a lot more kind of time and space to do the work you want to do, or actually is it kind of an ongoing negotiation? And just I guess that's kind of linked to how you kind of rebuild confidence and kind of rebuild, yeah, your identity in your work. If any of you wanted to kind of speak to that.
Yeah, I can say a bit about that. The kids have literally just walked in from school. Good timing. Yeah, I find the identity thing really interesting, because it's taken, it knocked my confidence a lot, and starting growing at the same time as having kids was a real, it's been difficult, and I feel like it's lasted longer than I kind of imagined. And I think you know, doing things like you know, coming to Oxford and standing around with lots of other vegetable growers and trying to kind of talk about growing and trying to engage in it, and finding it really difficult, because you know, I feel my confidence has just, you know, it went really, you know, I felt like what I was doing was childcare, and the veg growing was just something that I was kind of trying to do on the side. But I think it is just about the kids being small, and I think that your headspace is so somewhere else, and you know, they're the priority, and actually, because we were growing together, it meant that Ash was able to take on the veg, and so in a way I didn't have to worry about that. So my priority could be the children. And now, yeah, it's been great actually doing the box scheme and having that, having, you know, being able to kind of gradually move back into the farming side of things. And with that, my confidence has grown, and actually I can see now that, you know, I'm looking more to the future about other things I can take on, you know, and it's a relatively short amount of time, really. You think, you know, Digby's 11, stands 8, and when you're in it, it is so long, and you just think, oh, you know, you're probably thinking, God, I can't wait that long to be able to kind of get any sense of identity or get any sense of confidence back. But I think for me, it has taken that time, and it's such an amazing process, and it's such a, you know, I'm so thankful for that, and I'm very aware that I've got like a lot of more years of vegetable growing that I can do, as long as my body keeps going. But the child rearing is actually very, very short, and already I can see, you know, with our eldest going off to secondary school, and you don't get that much time with them really, and so you might as well throw yourself into that child rearing, and you know, the rest. And I, you know, Polly, what you were saying, like, it's not for everybody, and I definitely, like, I can really relate to, you know, having livestock is a very different situation as well. And I think, you know, it's very hard to, the point is, it's very hard to compare all of our situations, and actually that is, like, for me, that's the main theme, that you can't compare it. Don't try and compare yourself to anyone, because we're all trying to do it different, and we're all just like struggling along somehow until you kind of ride the wave and then find yourself, you know, a few years down the line, and you're kind of just about surviving and moving on.
I just wanted to add to that as well, that the confidence thing, when we were talking about it when preparing for this, I sort of realized how it's kind of, for me, it's worked the other way as well. And because our balance has been more me sort of focusing on the market garden, my my confidence for actually like caring for the kids was quite low. And it's like ridiculous tiny little things that you know, if you're not doing them all the time, it's like, oh God, what the hell am I going to put in the kids' lunch bags today, or something like that, where you're like, all these little things that, yeah, you do every day for the kids. So it also works the other way, basically. And I think it's definitely, yeah, I guess that's why I sort of regret not getting to the point of sharing things a bit sooner, because the more you do, either one, the market gardening or the childcare, the more confidence you build, and the better you get at it, and the more enjoyable it is. Yeah.
And like we said, you know, if we were to do it again, which I mean 100% not doing, but if we were, I think we would just look at it really differently. And actually, if like, yeah, if we had this sort of session, we're like, actually, you know, it is really useful to share these duties, because then you know, no one's losing their confidence anymore. Well, you will a bit, but like, you know, you're doing both the things and trying to make it work. And I think that's, yeah, something that we've only kind of come to realize now. But that's all right. We you know, we share a lot of it now, and yeah, we're moving forward.
I just want to say, on the maternity side, I didn't have a maternity leave because I discontinued kind of farming, so I had some very small babies in the truck doing shepherding. And you can't really, I had my second in childcare a couple of days a week from 6 months, and I think I had my first in childcare at 13 months because I was more worried about it, but actually I think I probably should have whacked them in earlier. But the other thing, I over relied probably on my mum with the first one, which is probably a bit unfair. So it's like, luckily I don't think she wrote a diary, so she can't say that, so I can't read it, but I think it's probably the truth. And so what happened is, I think I over relied on her when like James was sort of a year to a year and a half, and she is obviously older than me, and it, from a health perspective, it's not fair. So I think when you're giving it to the other childcare, like a childcare provider, like there's these brilliant girls mostly girls who looking after your kids, and that's their job and that's their focus, and they do an amazing job, and it's really, and you they get loads out of it, so it's like a fantastic thing for the kid as well as possibly the parents. The other thing I maybe learnt from the second child was I did not breastfeed for number 2, and my God, that was amazing for my sanity. So like, I don't know whether that helps anyone else, but you just get a lot of pressure to breastfeed. And obviously it works amazingly for some people, but I breastfed very little on number 2, and it improved my mental health amazingly. And that is never said, it's probably all the midwives tell you not to say that, but just in case anyone's in that situation, it's really nice to be able to hand a bottle of milk to someone else. So therefore, which obviously doesn't happen when you're breastfeeding. So if that helps anyone else out there who's in the situation, just make sure you are aware that is available to you, and don't like be too hard on yourself if that's the choice that you make.
Yeah, I thought my children, because when I was with them, they would breastfeed the whole time. I just thought, well, what's going to happen? And actually turned, like, my body adapted, and they adapted much more easily than I thought was possible. And actually they didn't need to breastfeed all day long, but I didn't realize that for quite a long time. Yeah. And just to add, I think, like, in general, societally, we've got a real problem with like giving due value to all care work. And that's been shown by the pandemic, and you know, clapping is not enough. It's about pay, and yeah, and lots of other things going on there, but that's potentially part of why you feel so unseen and isolated, is like there's a sort of system lack of value on the sort of the wider system level.
Yeah, absolutely, Alice. I was really reflecting, listening to that writing from your mother in the 70s in this collective farm, and you know, it comes up in all spheres, that yeah, you could probably read, well, a lot of people say exactly the same thing today. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting all coming together in this session, almost to kind of just open up these discussions and these experiences, because they aren't really talked about. Maybe they are, like with friends on the park bench, but I know certainly, yeah, myself and lots of people I know, it was a real shock once the baby comes along and you've had a really busy, engaging life before, and then suddenly you're not quite sure how to kind of take those next steps, especially in the pandemic. A lot of, just acknowledging that a lot of people have had kids in the past couple of years, which has added a very complex layer of isolation and yeah, lack of support, or just lack of things to do. a lot of no kids groups running has been going on for a long time. But I guess, yeah, it's, you know, the writing from your mother and reflecting of, wow, yeah, you could kind of read the same thing today. I guess it's, yeah, I mean, I guess it's a question for everyone of like, what are the kind of the next, where do we go from here? And that's probably asked all the time. But I really feel and hear, and I think lots of people say, that there is a real yearning and a real desire to kind of be able to do the work we all want to do. And, you know, for those of people who do and can have kids, like also have kids, and it not kind of stay in the same trajectory of like isolation and unvalued work, and, you know, it's been going on for so long, and there is a sense of feeling fed up of it, but feeling almost trapped in it, and it just kind of not changing. And I know, yeah, I mean, it's okay to sound a bit negative, but I guess, you know, it's interesting hearing that all the speakers who shared did also come up with really good practical solutions that worked for them in their context, be that, you know, sending kids to the tennis club, or yeah, just having kids on farm, or kind of doing what works for the specific situation each person is in, and that's the most important thing to do what works for you, not feel this kind of societal judgment or being afraid to do what you need. But I guess from the panelists, is there any kind of, I guess, like reflections or anything else to add on practical solutions, or like hacks, baby hacks, or anything that you found were just really useful for, I'm just thinking of people listening who may be going to have kids or have small kids and trying to figure this all out, like if there's like, oh, this is the one thing I'd advise. I had a friend last year, had a kid, and gave me a call, was like, anything you advise? And I was like, what Kate said, I was like, do not think you can stick your baby in a sling and go farming in 30-degree heat, they'll just melt. Hard reality. But yeah, I think there's a lot of that. It depends on your child, you know. Actually, I do have a friend who sticks their kid in a sling and does work. But yeah, if any of you had anything else, that'd be great.
Something that Kate said about something like structurally, in terms of like employers like offering work that works around school hours, is really helpful to people, and then you can have more of a balance in your roles. So Growing Communities offered a traineeship for single parents, which was brilliant, because they could go and come at the end after drop off and pick up their kids at the end of school. But generally flexible working and a sort of openness to that is really helpful. And I think, you know, you'll find that a lot of parents are really wanting to do the work because they want to change from maybe their domestic time or whatever. So yeah, offering maybe work that can fit into those hours is really helpful. And you'll get some really excellent workers.
Yeah, I can just go on that. Like the farm labourers who work for me, they've all got unsociable hours, but I've got my farm secretary. She is amazing, and she works within school hours, and she is probably completely overqualified for the job I've got her doing, but it's probably the whole confidence thing. And I'm really glad that we're able to, well, I hope she doesn't mind working for me, but I'm really glad that we give her that opportunity to get back into work. And then actually the secretary I had before her was the same sort of situation. It was mums who've lost their confidence and then need to go back into work, and they come and work for me for a couple of years and then go and get a better job, because probably there's better jobs out there. But it's good to be able to give that opportunity and to be aware of that. And I think it is an interesting issue. I don't know whether it's a baby hack, but I was just reading them. Someone's written about the financial aspect of childcare versus your job, and I think this is a really interesting debate or question, and that comes up a lot. It's probably not so specific to farming, but in my opinion, which I appreciate is not necessarily everyone's opinion, I think it's not necessarily good to compare your wage to the money for childcare, because if you do that, you are less likely to continue to do your job. And what that means is, from the trajectory of your job, you will always be 2 years behind your contemporaries on the equivalent job, because you've decided that actually your wage, if you directly compare it on a financial level, it normally does not pan out. While actually, from a life perspective, if you can keep working even part-time, it is probably a positive for you yourself in a life. It keeps the variety there. So it's a very difficult thing to say, but if you're in that situation and you're going, I can't keep working because I financially can't afford it, then that's fine. But if it's a borderline argument, then if you look on a year basis rather than a 5-year basis, from a 5-year basis, it's massively positive to keep working, but on a year basis, it's a difficult argument. So I just think it's worth highlighting that. And that's why lots of women typically women tend to stop working, is because they say they can't afford it. So if we could encourage people to continue that, I think that's a positive. I don't know whether I'm going to get lots of abuse on the chat for that, but I think it's important to highlight, really.
Yeah, I mean, if I wanted to keep my job, I had to come back after a year. And, doing the finances compared to childcare, I was earning £40 a week and not seeing my children. However, for me, overall, it was the decision I wanted to make. And I also appreciate some people don't want to do that. But the financial discussion, it's difficult to have, but I think it's really key. And lots of the way we value things, unfortunately, come to how things are valued in pay, which is not how it should be. And that's certainly also impacted in terms of, how we split maternity care between me and my partner. His job pays more than mine. I know we're running out of time now. I think we've got 3 minutes. So
yeah, there's a couple of questions that have came up, and originally when we were planning this session, we said we would ask the people who wrote the questions in the chat to say the questions themselves, which we can do, or I can ask them for you. But one of the questions is actually just slightly building on what's been asked here, so we could maybe ask this one question and wrap it up, which is a question from Ellen. And Ellen, you're very welcome to ask this question yourself if you want to unmute yourself, or you can just write in the chat if you want me to read it out. Okay, I'm going to go ahead. I guess it's just building on it, what's just been shared around how you like that. Well, work is more than the finances of it. It's also like meaning and passion and joy and your individual identity away from parenthood. But Ellen's asked, she said, not really a question but a comment. Her first child he's nearly 1, but what's really struck is how difficult it's been to share childcare with partner, and there are financially and more so cultural barriers against men in this case taking time out of work for childcare. And does anyone on the panel have any thoughts or reflections or experiences on this? Just kind of sharing childcare in early years with a partner.
Yeah, it's kind of, this is an interesting difference between being, in our situation where we're running the business and self-employed, and as opposed to being employed. It kind of feels quite different in that respect.
Yeah, I don't really know what to say. Yeah, I mean, I look at other friends that do split, you know, people do it, and it seems like people do share the roles half and half, and I find it really interesting to see how they navigate that and how they make it pay. And I suppose, you know, that it's difficult when you've been used to living on a certain amount of money because you both work full time, and then suddenly you're in a very different situation. But I guess if you can work, if you just realize that actually there's going to be 10 years of your life where between you do, you know, for the first 5 years, say you do 5 days a week between you, then you just survive on the money that you've got, and then you know that in the future when they go to school and things, suddenly it becomes easier. But I mean, obviously that's easier said than done. I know that 5 days a week doesn't necessarily sustain.
Yeah, we pooled our income in a joint bank account, whoever was earning, which was helpful. So we're about to be chucked out, I think.
Yeah, so I think my clock was like 2 minutes slow, and now I've just seen on the chat the actual time is 3:30, and the room gets passed on to the next session. But as Naomi said in the chat, if people want to continue to discuss and exchange this and share contact details and build a bit of I guess like a space to continue this conversation, that you can do that by following the instructions in the chat. And even if you don't want to kind of stay in the chat, it's just a way to kind of collect I guess like people who kind of want to continue this conversation now or kind of going forward in the next while. But just to say a massive thank you to all the participants. It was great having having over 70 people throughout the session, and a big thanks to Ash and Kate and Alice and Polly and Hannah for all your really beautiful and personal sharing. And it was great to all be here together.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. See ya.